Sometimes a great wandering thought sees the ages still unaccomplished, seizes the force in its eternal flow, and precipitates upon earth a powerful vision which has the power to realize what it sees. The world is a vision becoming real. Its past and its present are not merely the result of an obscure impulse coming from the womb of time, of a slow accumulation of sediments which little by little molds us and stifles us and imprisons us. It is the powerful golden attraction of the future which draws us in spite of ourselves, as the sun draws the lotus from the mud, and forces us to a glory greater than any our mud or efforts or present triumphs could have foreseen or created. Sri Aurobindo is this vision and this power of precipitating the future into the present. What he saw in an instant, the ages and millions of men will unwittingly accomplish. Unknowingly, they will seek the new imperceptible quiver that has entered the earth's atmosphere. From age to age, great beings come amongst us to hew a great opening of truth in the sepulchre of the past. And truly, these beings are the great destroyer of the past. They come with the sword of knowledge to shatter our fragile empires. This year, we are celebrating Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary. Though he is hardly known to a handful of men, yet his work is discussed by philosophers, praised by poets. People acclaim his sociological vision and his yoga. But Sri Aurobindo is a living action, a word becoming real. And every day, in the 1,000 events that seem to want to rend the earth and topple its edifices, we can witness the first reflux of the force he has set in motion. At the beginning of the century, when India was still struggling against British domination, Sri Aurobindo asserted, "It is not a revolt against the British government that is needed. It is in fact a revolt against the whole universal nature. For the problem is fundamental. It is not a question of bringing a new philosophy to the world, fresh ideas or grand illuminations. It is not a question of making the prison of our lives more habitable or endowing men with ever more fantastic powers. We send rockets to the moon, but we know nothing of our own hearts. It is a question, says Sri Aurobindo, of creating a new physical nature which is to be the habitation of the supramental being in a new evolution. For the imperfection of man is not the last word of nature, but his perfection too is not the last peak of the spirit.
This was Calcutta, the 15th of August, 1872. At the time of the Brahma Muhurta, the sacred period of 48 minutes before sunrise, when people silently recite the sacred Gayatri mantra, the mother of the Vedas. But a new dawn was about to come when the sound of conch resounded in the ladies' quarters at 14 South Circular Road. Its deep resonance filled the morning air, announcing a new birth. A son was just born to Swarnalata and Krishna Dan Ghosh. Who knows what inspired Dr. Ghosh to choose the name Aurobindo for his third son? A name never heard before in Bengal. But it had a deep and beautiful meaning, for in Sanskrit, Aravinda means lotus, a flower that keeps its face turned towards the sun as it spreads its 100 petals to 100 sides. (1872) also saw the birth of Impressionism in France. While modern physics was exploring the secrets of matter with Max Planck, and Jules Verne was busy probing the future. Yet, Queen Victoria was about to become Empress of India, and the conquest of Africa was not even completed. It was the turning point from one world to another. But Europe was still at the peak of its glory, and the game seemed to be played there. This is how it appeared to Dr. Krishnadan Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo's father, who had studied medicine in England and had returned to India completely anglicized. A man of strong character and energy, Dr. Ghosh was a tremendous atheist and a convinced Darwinian. He did not want his 3 sons, of whom Sri Aurobindo was the youngest, to be in the least contaminated by the retrograde mysticism that seemed to be bringing his country to ruins. And this is how young Ara, as his family members called him, grew up in an English atmosphere at home in the town of Rangpur, ignorant of his mother tongue. But Krishnadan was also a gentleman with an extremely sweet heart. As a convinced progressive, he created a society for women, and as a patron of the arts, he supported the famed actor Girish Chandra Ghosh and his renowned Star Theatre. Ara's mother, Swarnalata Devi, could write stories and dramas, make small talk in English, look comfortable in a frock, and stay in the saddle when she went riding. Her creamy complexion won her the epithet Rose of Rangpur. But, unfortunately, she fell prey to her family disease, hysteria, which rendered her family's life, as well as her own, unhappy. Despite this, Ara's love for his mother remained profound, and he once referred to himself as a mad mother's mad son. At the age of 5, the frail young boy, who was timid by nature, was sent by his father, along with his 2 elder brothers, to the Loreto Convent School at Darjeeling, an institution run by Irish nuns. There, the schoolmates of the 3 brothers were mostly English boys, and English was the only language spoken in the boarding house. Ara retained few memories of his 2 years in Darjeeling. In later years, he recalled walks along paths overhung with golden ferns. Across the valleys, he could see forests of pine, deodar, and oak. And above the hills, Kanchenjunga, the third highest mountain in the world. Another of his memories was a curious inner experience.
I was lying down one day when I saw suddenly a great darkness rushing into me and enveloping me and the whole of the universe. After that, I had a great tamas or inertia always hanging on to me.
This darkness would stay with him for the next 14 years. Soon after, his father, who had great ambitions for his sons, decided to take them to England for their education, along with his wife, Swarnalata, and his youngest daughter, Sarojini. They left Calcutta on a morning in 1879. Ara was just 7 years old. The city of Manchester was then one of England's main industrial centres. Its dreary landscape was dominated by smoking factories and ugly cotton mills. This proud product of the Industrial Revolution, which sold its cotton all over the world, was built on the depths of human misery. And it is not hard to imagine the impression of this dismal, perpetually grey world must have made on young Ara, cast here after years in sun-bathed Bengal and Darjeeling's Himalayan scenery.
I saw a world stripped of beauty. Mean and clumsy were the buildings or pretentious, and aimed at a false elegance. Miles of brick, with hardly a bit of green here and there. These are the cities.
In Manchester, the 3 boys were placed in the house of an English clergyman, the Reverend William Druitt, and his wife, with strict instructions that they should not be allowed to make the acquaintance of any Indian or undergo any Indian influence. These instructions were carried out to the letter, and Ara grew up in entire ignorance of India, her people, her religion, and her culture. Soon after their arrival, his father returned to India, followed a few months later by his wife, Swarnalata, her newborn baby, Barindra, and Sarojini. Ara would never again see his father, who died just before his return to India, and barely his mother, who was extremely ill by this time and did not recognize him. So, this is a child who grew up outside every influence of family, country, and tradition, a truly free spirit. Very little is known about Aurobindo's early life in England, a period of nearly 14 years. In Manchester, Ara was too young to join the grammar school, like his elder brothers, so he was taught privately at home by the Druids for the first 5 years. Reverend Druid, an accomplished Latin scholar, grounded Ara in the language very well and also taught him English and history. Since he was studying at home, he had plenty of time to read books according to his taste. Those books included the Bible, Shakespeare, Shelley, and Keats. At the age of 11, Ara published his first poem, an imitation of Shelley's poem, The Cloud. Another poem by Shelley that he loved was The Revolt of Islam, in which the poet told the story of a struggle for freedom set in a mythic East, but patterned on the French Revolution. Ara read it again and again, and resolved to dedicate his life to a similar world change. At the age of 11, he strongly received the impression that a period of general upheaval and great revolutionary changes was coming in the world, and he himself was destined to play a part in it. After 5 years in Manchester, Ara went to study in London. At first, he was excited by the change and found the city a wonderful place. But soon, the rush and the turmoil and the struggle of it turned it into a dreadful city, and he longed for the peaceful life of his native land. In London, Ara enrolled in St. Paul's School, one of the premier educational institutions of England. Its headmaster, William Walker, was so impressed by the aptitude of his young student that he personally coached him in Greek. 3 years later, Ara could skip half his classes and spend most of his time engrossed in his favorite occupation, reading. Nothing seemed to escape this voracious adolescent, for he quickly mastered enough German and Italian to read Goethe and Dante in the original, Prometheus Unbound, the French poets, Homer, Aristophanes, and soon much of European thought peopled a solitude of which he has said nothing. At that time, Ara discovered that he was extremely selfish, and he felt he ought to give up selfishness. That was a turning point in his inner life. During this period, Ara used to live on a slice or two of bread and butter and a cup of tea in the morning, and in the evening only a penny saveloy. His father had almost stopped sending money, and for nearly 2 years he survived on very little. Self-absorbed in his own world, he never sought to form relationships, unlike his brother Manmohan, who roamed through London in the company of his friends, Stephen Phillips and Oscar Wilde. However, there was never anything austere about Ara, and certainly nothing of the Puritan. It was just that he was elsewhere, and his world was replete. He even had a way of joking with a straight face, which never left him. Whether St. Paul's School appreciated his sense of humor, we do not know. But it certainly appreciated his astonishing culture, and he was awarded a classic scholarship to attend King's College, Cambridge. Aurobindo was now just 18. In his first year at King's, he won all the prizes in Greek and Latin verse, but his heart was no longer in his studies. It was Joan of Arc, Mazzini, the American Revolution that haunted him, and the liberation of his country from British rule. He became interested in Indian politics when his father began sending him a Calcutta newspaper, the Bengali, relating cases of maltreatment of Indians by Englishmen. In his letters, Dr. Ghosh described the British government in India as being heartless. At that time, Aurobindo hardly knew what being an Indian meant, but he learned fast. Soon, he became secretary of the Indian Majlis, an association of Indian students at Cambridge, and delivered revolutionary speeches. He also joined a secret society called Lotus and Dagger, in which each member vowed to work for the liberation of India. Aurobindo left King's College with a first class in the Tripos Classics examination, but he did not care to graduate. In the same casual way, he prepared for the celebrated Indian Civil Service examination. He passed brilliantly, but neglected to appear for the horsemanship test, going for a walk that day instead of trotting at Woolwich, and was consequently disqualified. At that time, Aurobindo was an agnostic. The Bible was the only scripture he had been acquainted with in his childhood. But during his studies at Cambridge, he came across a brief statement of the 6 philosophies of India in one of Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East, and he was especially struck by the concept of the Atman, or self. This, he thought, might be the clue to the reality behind life and the world, and the Atman, the self, the true thing to be realized in life. Despite his limited contact with his motherland, he soon came to understand the unique value of her civilization. At the age of 18, he wrote,
"Look at the India of Vikramaditya. How gorgeous was her beauty. How Olympian the voices of her poets. How sensuous the pencil of her painters. How languidly voluptuous the outlines of her sculpture. In those days, every man was marvelous to himself, and many were marvelous to their fellows. But the mightiest marvel of all were the philosophers." What a philosophy was that! For she scaled the empyrean on the winged sandals of meditation, soared above the wide fires of the sun and above the whirling stars, up where the flaming walls of the universe are guiltless of wind and cloud, and there, in the burning core of existence, saw the face of the Most High God. She saw God and did not perish, rather fell back to earth, not blasted with excess of light, but with a mystic burden on her murmuring lips, too large for human speech to utter or for the human brain to understand. Such was she then.
When Aurobindo sailed back to India in January 1893, he was just 20. He had no position and no title. His father had just died, but the urge to deliver his country from the bondage of British rule was burning in his heart. After 3 weeks' voyage on the steamship Carthage, Aurobindo reached Bombay and set foot again on Indian soil. The darkness that had enveloped him in Darjeeling and always hung over him during his stay in England at last left him. And when he stepped ashore on the Apollo Bunder in Bombay, he was overtaken by a spontaneous spiritual experience. A vast calm descended upon him, a calm which surrounded him and remained for months afterwards. (1893). This was the year when Swami Vivekananda sailed to America to take part in the Parliament of Religions at Chicago, carrying with him the light of Vedanta. And this was the year Sri Aurobindo returned from the West. Of course, Aurobindo was not yet Sri Aurobindo, just Aravind Babu. From Bombay, where he just landed, he went straight to Baroda, where he had found a position with His Highness Sayajirao Gaikwad, the enlightened Maharaja of that princely state. He first worked in the Land Settlement Department, just to learn the ropes. Then, after a few years, he became a professor of French and English at Baroda College, before becoming its vice principal. The Maharaja, who had a high opinion of his intellectual abilities, also employed him as his private secretary. But from the beginning, it was the destiny of India that preoccupied Sri Aurobindo. He was just 21 when he wrote with his razor-sharp pen a series of 9 articles in the Hindu Prakash, one of Bombay's largest newspapers. Those articles, titled New Lamps for Old, created a real scandal, for he not only referred to the Queen Empress of India as an old lady so called by way of courtesy, but he urged his countrymen to shake off the yoke of the British rule. Trenchantly, he attacked the mendicant policy of the Indian Congress. No reforms, no collaboration was his motto, and his aim was to organize all the energies of the nation towards revolutionary action. This must have required some courage, for in 1893, Britain ruled over 3/4 of the world. But Sri Aurobindo had a special way of dealing with the problem. he laid the blame not on the English, but on the Indians themselves.
Our actual enemy is not any force exterior to ourselves, but our own crying weaknesses, our cowardice, our purblind sentimentalism. To play with baubles is our ambition, not to deal with grave questions in a spirit of serious energy.
Sri Aurobindo's career as a political journalist started on a high note, but his criticisms were so incisive that they frightened the Congress leaders. The Maratha leader, Mahadeo Govind Ranade, warned the proprietor of the paper that if this went on, he would be prosecuted for sedition. Asked to tone down his articles, Sri Aurobindo soon lost interest, and he realized that newspaper articles were not enough to awaken the country. The people were not yet ready. And this is how he suspended all public activity and began to work from behind the scenes, in secret. Besides working for the Gaekwad, Sri Aurobindo spent these years studying the conditions of the country and exploring the possibilities of a revolutionary uprising. At the same time, he engaged in the study of Bengali and Sanskrit, a language he learned and mastered by himself. This exceptional mastery opened to him the immense treasure house of Indian heritage. He read the Upanishads, the Gita, the Puranas, the two great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the dramas of Kalidas, and much more. Suddenly, as ancient India revealed herself to his wandering vision, his soul caught fire, and strange things started to happen to him. One day, in the first year of his stay at Baroda, while going in a horse carriage, he suddenly found himself in danger of an accident. But at that very moment, he had the vision of the Godhead surging up from within and averting the danger. This was his second unexpected spiritual experience. Unexpected because at that time he had no direct knowledge of spirituality or interest in it.
That was a thing I knew nothing about, never bargained for, didn't understand either. The agnostic was in me, the atheist was in me, the skeptic was in me, and I was not absolutely sure that there was a God at all. But since I set foot on the Apollo Bandar in Bombay, I began to have spiritual experiences which were not divorced from this world, but had an inner and infinite bearing on it, such as a feeling of the infinite pervading material space and the immanent inhabiting material objects and bodies.
In 1894, Sri Aurobindo visited Bengal for the first time after his return from England. There, he met his mother, his sister Sarojini, and his younger brother, Barindra. It was their first reunion after more than 15 years. He also met his maternal grandfather, Rishi Rajnarayan Bose, and his uncles, aunts, and cousins. Rajnarayan Bose was then passing his old age in the peaceful retreat of Deogar. Sri Aurobindo must have felt a great affinity with him, for he was one of the makers of modern Bengal. In him was the whole spirit of Indian culture and manhood, a spirit that stood up and asserted itself against every form of alien domination, a spirit for which he was given the title Grandfather of Indian Nationalism. In 1898, back to Baroda, Sri Aurobindo published his first book of poems, Songs to Mirtila, which contained many poems he'd written in England in his teens and a few written at Baroda. It is probably around this time that Sri Aurobindo discovered the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and the bold utterances of Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna was a living challenge to the materialistic rationalism of the times, a living refutation of the pervading spirit of skepticism and atheism. About him, Sri Aurobindo wrote,
In a unique and extraordinary life, he took the kingdom of heaven by violence, seizing upon one yogic method after another, and extracting the substance out of it with an incredible rapidity, always to return to the heart of the whole matter, the realization and possession of God by the power of love.
Year after year, Sri Ramakrishna relentlessly explored all the spiritual paths he found on his way, from yoga and Vedanta, to Tantra, Christianism, and Sufism, to finally discover that all these paths were leading to the same goal and experience, the realization of God, the ultimate reality, which alone can give man supreme fulfillment and everlasting peace. As he used to say, Yato mat, tato path, as many faiths, so many paths. For him, all was one, and the only aim of life was to meet with the divine consciousness, the only permanent reality. At that time, the influence of the sage of Dakshineshwar was strong all over the country, and it acted as a potent regenerative force in the Renaissance of India, setting ablaze the awakening spirit of nationalism. (1900). At the turn of the century, Sri Aurobindo jotted down in his diary,
The last century of the second millennium after Christ has begun. Of the 20 centuries, it seems the most full of incalculable possibilities and to open the widest door on destiny. The mind of humanity feels it is conscious of a voice, of a distant advancing ocean, and a sound as of the wings of a mighty archangel flying towards the world, but whether to empty the vials of the wrath of God or to declare a new gospel of peace upon earth and goodwill unto men is as yet dark to our understanding.
Indeed, the first 2 decades of the 20th century were to witness some great human adventures, many natural calamities, and the giant progress made by science. The solid Newtonian universe was shaken to its foundations by the theory of relativity and quantum physics, while the Chinese and Soviet revolutions and the First World War showed that the road to peace was still long. It is in 1900 that Sri Aurobindo made his first revolutionary move. He sent a young Bengali soldier of the Baroda army, Jatin Banerjee, as his lieutenant to Bengal. His mission was to secretly establish revolutionary propaganda and to recruit throughout Bengal for the preparation of an armed insurrection. Young men were to be trained in activities that would be helpful for military action, such as physical exercises, athletics, and drills of various kinds. As soon as the idea was sown, it attained rapid acceptance, and in no time, the few young men with revolutionary aims became many. Jatin, who was exceedingly energetic and capable, formed his first group in Calcutta. He also entered into relations with P. Mitter, Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, and other Bengali revolutionaries who had already started their work through the inspiration of a Japanese artist who was a friend of the Tagore family, Baron Okakura Kakuzo. In April 1901, Sri Aurobindo married Mrinalini Devi, the eldest daughter of Bhupal Chandra Bose, in Calcutta. Soon after his marriage, he returned to Baroda with his wife and his sister, Sarojini, via Deoghar and Nainital. One morning, a few months after his wedding, Sri Aurobindo's younger brother, Barin, arrived in Baroda. He soon became associated with his elder brother's revolutionary activities. After a few months, Sri Aurobindo sent him to Bengal to help Jatin Banerjee in organizing the revolutionary groups and rousing the youth of Bengal. Along with their physical training, the young men learned of the lives of Mazzini, Joan of Arc, and other revolutionaries. Above all, they drew inspiration from a study of the Gita, which imbued them with the spirit of selfless work and sacrifice for the country. The following year, Sri Aurobindo returned to Bengal to visit some of the revolutionary centers that were already organized. There, he found that the prevailing mood was apathy and despair. His experience on this visit persuaded him that the secret revolutionary action by itself was not likely to be effective unless it was supported by a wide public movement. The immediate need was to increase patriotic fervor and popularize the idea of independence as the aim of Indian politics. But to achieve this miracle, to arouse the passion of the people and awaken their imagination, Sri Aurobindo understood that only the highest ideals would work, always as high and wide and vast as possible. And this is how he taught his students at Baroda College. One of them, K.M. Munshi, the well-known novelist and politician, recalled many years later. To the students of our college, Professor Ghosh was a figure enveloped in mystery. He was reputed to be a poet, a master of many languages, and in touch with Russian nihilists. Was he? Many stories of his doings were whispered from mouth to mouth, among the students almost with awe. Under his influence, we became ardent revolutionaries. We talked of Garibaldi and the French Revolution, and hoped to win India's freedom by a few £100 of gunpowder. I remember only one occasion when I directly talked to Professor Aravind Ghosh. "How can nationalism be developed?" I asked. He pointed to a wall map of India and said something to this effect.
Look at that map. Learn to find in it the portrait of Bharat Mata. The cities, mountains, rivers and forests are the materials which go to make up her body. The people inhabiting the country are the cells which go to make up her living tissues. Our literature is her memory and speech. The spirit of her culture is her soul. The happiness and freedom of her children is her salvation. Behold Bharat as a living mother. Meditate upon her and worship her in the ninefold way of bhakti.
In 1902, Sri Aurobindo met two great personalities who soon became close friends and played a major role in his revolutionary action and in the life of the nation. Bal Gangadhar Tilak, the renowned Marathi leader, and Margaret Noble, better known as Sister Nivedita. Tilak had appreciated Sri Aurobindo's lucid exposure of the mendicant policy of the Congress moderates in his New Lamps for Old articles. Sri Aurobindo soon built up a close relationship with him, and he became a member of a secret society Tilak started in Maharashtra. Sri Aurobindo took the oath of the society and was introduced to the Revolutionary Council in Bombay. Holding in his hands an unsheathed sword and a copy of the Gita, Sri Aurobindo took this pledge.
As long as there is life in me, and as long as India is not liberated from her chains of subjection, I will carry on the revolution. If at any time I disclose a single word or a single event of the society or harm it in any way, it shall be at the cost of my own life.
Among the foreign friends of India who had a decisive hand in shaping India's freedom movement at this time was Sister Nivedita, Swami Vivekananda's spiritual daughter and foremost disciple. She was a child of the independence movement in her native country, Ireland. Sri Aurobindo recalled his first meeting with her in Baroda.
Khasi Rao and myself went to receive her at the station. I was very much enamored at that time of her book, Kali, the Mother, and I think we spoke of that. She had heard, she said, that I was a worshipper of force, by which she meant that I belonged to the secret revolutionary party like herself. She was open and frank and talked openly of her revolutionary plans to everybody. There was no concealment about her. Whenever she used to speak on revolution, it was her very soul, her true personality that came out.
In her lecture, Swami Vivekananda as a Patriot, Nivedita passionately declared, India must find herself in Asia, not in a shoddy Europe made in Germany. The future would not be like the past, she said. Yet, it could only be firmly established through a deep and living reverence for that past. Then, she quoted Vivekananda's great cry, "We are under a hypnotism. We think we are weak, and this makes us weak. Let us think ourselves strong, and we are invincible." Vivekananda passed away on the 4th of July, 1902. Sri Aurobindo never met him, but he admired Vivekananda's bold defense of India's soul. In 1903, the Maharaja requested Sri Aurobindo to come with him for a tour of Kashmir as his private secretary. It was there, in Srinagar, that Sri Aurobindo had his third spiritual experience, as unexpected and unbidden as the first two, but of a vital importance. While walking on the ridge of the Takht-e-Suleiman, the seat of Solomon, also called the Shankaracharya Hill, he got the realization of the vacant infinite.
One stands upon a mountain ridge and glimpses or mentally feels a wideness, a pervasiveness, a nameless vast in nature. Then, suddenly, there comes the touch, a revelation, a flooding. The mental loses itself in the spiritual. One bears the first invasion of the infinite.
When his friend, Keshav Ganesh Deshpande, advised him to practice yoga, Sri Aurobindo boldly refused.
My idea about yoga was that one had to retire into mountains and caves and give up everything. I was not prepared to do that, for I was interested in the work for the freedom of my country. A solitary salvation leaving the world to its fate was felt as almost distasteful.
In December 1904, Sri Aurobindo attended the Bombay Congress. In this session, he prevailed upon the leaders to fight for full independence and without any compromise. He was the first political leader, along with Tilak, to publicly criticize the Congress politics of endless compromise and useless petitions. He advocated a more radical approach: passive resistance, non-cooperation, and complete independence as the only ideal worthy of a self-respecting nation. This appeal for full political independence came more than 10 years before Gandhi came back from South Africa and entered the political scene. It is around this time that Sri Aurobindo realized that yoga could serve other purposes than escape from the world. While being an agnostic, he always thought that the great spiritual figures of the world could not have sought vainly after a chimera. If there was such a thing as spiritual power, why not use it for the freedom of the country? And he needed power to liberate India.
When I turned to the yoga and resolved to practice it and find out if my idea was right, I did it in this spirit and with this prayer to him: If thou art, then thou knowest my heart. Thou knowest that I do not ask for liberation. I do not ask for anything which others ask for. I ask only for strength to uplift this nation. I ask only to be allowed to live and work for this people whom I love. Then I began to practice pranayama at Khasi Rao's place in Baroda, at one time for 6 hours or more a day, drawing the breath into my head. Some remarkable results came with it. First, I felt a sort of electricity all around me. Secondly, there were some visions of a minor kind. Thirdly, I began to have a very rapid flow of poetry. With pranayama, I found that the mind began to work with great illumination and power.
As we will see, in the modern age of science, Sri Aurobindo pursued the spiritual life in the true scientific spirit, if by science is meant a sincere seeking for the truth through a method of scrupulous observation, experimentation, and experience. Indeed, what Sri Aurobindo discovered through his yogic discipline came just a few years after Einstein wrote his first theory of relativity, shaking to its foundations the solid Newtonian universe and our perceptions of matter and life. Matter is not what it seems to be, and life is a deeper mystery than what we imagined. A few months after Sri Aurobindo started his yogic discipline, he wrote a letter to his wife, Mrinalini, in which he clearly explained the radical changes occurring in his being.
My dearest Mrinalini, you must have realized by now that the person with whom your fate is linked is a very strange one. I don't have the same mental outlook, the same aim in life, the same field of action as most men have in modern time. With me, all is different, all is uncommon. I have 3 manias. One might call them madnesses. The first is that I firmly believe that the qualities, talent, higher education, learning, and wealth that God has given me all belong to Him, and I am entitled to use only so much of them as is necessary for the maintenance of the family, and whatever else is thought indispensable. And all that remains should be returned to God. If I used everything for myself, for my own pleasure and luxury, I should be a thief. The second mania is a recent possession. It is that by whatever means possible, I must see God face to face. If God exists, there must be some way or other of realizing His existence and meeting Him. However hard and rugged the way, I am resolved to tread it. The third mania is this. Others look upon their country as a mass of matter, comprising a number of fields, plains, forests, mountains, and rivers, and nothing more. I look upon it as my mother. I revere and adore her. Today, the whole country in its present plight is at my door, seeking for shelter and help. There are 300 million of my brethren in this land, of whom many are dying of starvation, and most, afflicted with sorrow and suffering, drag on a wretched, precarious existence. What does a son do when he sees a demon sitting upon his mother's chest and about to drink her lifeblood? Does he sit down to his meals with a quiet mind and enjoy himself in the company of his wife and children? Or does he run to the rescue of his mother? I know I have the strength to uplift this fallen race. It is not a physical strength. I'm not going to fight with a sword or a gun, but with the power of knowledge. The force of the Kshatriya, the warrior, is not the only force. There is also the force of the Brahmin, which is founded on knowledge.
This was Sri Aurobindo's mindset after practicing pranayam and various yogic exercises for a few months. An intense need for truth was now burning in his heart. But really, to see God face to face? For Sri Aurobindo, spiritual life was not a matter of religious belief or vague philosophical conception, but a matter of experience. This reminds us of Vivekananda, who, in his longing to know the truth, went to see many yogis and leaders of religious sects, always asking the same question: "Sir, have you seen God?" But not one could say that he had seen God. Where then should he go? Suddenly, he remembered Sri Ramakrishna, whom he had met for the first time at the house of a friend, and who had left a deep impression upon him. Immediately, he went to Dakshineshwar and asked Sri Ramakrishna the same question: "Sir, have you seen God?" But what was his surprise when the answer came with a smile on the master's lips: "Yes, I see him just as I see you here, only in a much intenser sense. God can be realized. Yes, one can see and talk to him as I am doing with you. But who cares to do so?" On the 20th of July, 1905, the Viceroy of India, Lord Curzon, announced the partition of Bengal. Immediately, it created an uproar all over India, and particularly in Bengal. Sri Aurobindo denounced the manipulation, which aimed at dividing the nation, and particularly dividing Hindus from Muslims.
This measure is no mere administrative proposal, but a blow straight at the heart of the nation.
Divide and conquer was indeed the policy of the British government, but this time the partition acted as a catalyst to unite people and triggered the first great awakening of the Indian masses. A people which had slumbered for more than a millennium suddenly awoke vigorously, full of life and energy, as though a master of hypnosis had laid his finger on India's eyes and cried, "Awake!" The whole country seemed to be bubbling and boiling. The hearts of Marathas, Punjabis, and Bengalis beat to the same rhythm. Sri Aurobindo understood that the nation was finally ready to change. The time had come for him to enter publicly into the struggle for India's freedom. From Baroda, he sent Lieutenant Madhav Rao Jadhav, a friend of his, to get military training in Europe, while Barin organized revolutionary activities in Maniktola Garden, a family property on the outskirts of Calcutta. One of these activities, apart from manufacturing bombs, was to procure and distribute guns, rifles, and pistols. Purchase, theft, and loot were the three methods of procurement. A little later, Sri Aurobindo went to Bengal and met Jatindranath Mukherjee, better known as Bhaga Jatin. He was called Bhaga, or Tiger Jatin, because to save the life of a young man, he had killed a tiger, armed only with a Darjeeling dagger. Bhaga Jatin was a redoubtable revolutionary who succeeded for many years in defying the military might of the British Raj. Finally, betrayed and besieged, he fell in 1915, fighting with 5 trusted comrades against a whole troop of soldiers. Sri Aurobindo once said,
"He was a man who would belong to the front rank of humanity anywhere. Such beauty and strength together I haven't seen.
About the use of violence, Sri Aurobindo once explained,
If there is a truth in non-violence, there is a truth in destruction also. Peace is part of the highest ideal, but it must be spiritual, or at the very least, psychological in its basis. Without a change in human nature, it cannot come with any finality. If it is attempted on any other basis, it will fail, and even may leave things worse than before.
Sri Aurobindo believed that in a country as vast as India, with so few British soldiers, guerrilla warfare, accompanied by general resistance and revolt, might be enough to force the British out of India. There was also the possibility of a general revolt in the Indian army. But for him, guerrilla warfare was not enough. He considered the shaking off of the economic yoke and the development of Indian trade and industry as a necessary concomitant of the revolutionary endeavor. Both Tilak and Sri Aurobindo were in favor of boycott of British goods. Following the partition of Bengal, Sri Aurobindo wrote 2 pamphlets, No Compromise and Bhavani Mandir. Bhavani Mandir was more Barin's idea than his, and in all likelihood it was derived from Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's revolutionary novel, Anandamat, The Abbey of Bliss. Its central theme was based on a revolt of North Indian sannyasins against the British rule in 1763 and the following years, a revolt considered by some as the first war of independence. Warren Hastings, then the Governor-General of India, extolled their courage. These sannyasis appear so suddenly in towns or villages, he said, that one would think they had dropped from the blue. They are strong, brave, and energetic beyond belief. Bhavani Mandir was meant to train a band of men to free the country from foreign domination. The idea was to build a temple consecrated to Bhavani, the mother, where devotees were to receive both spiritual and political initiation for the deliverance of India. In Bhavani Mandir, Sri Aurobindo wrote,
But who is Bhavani, the mother, and why should we erect a temple to her? Bhavani is the infinite energy. In the unending revolutions of the world, as the wheel of the eternal turns mightily in its courses, the infinite energy which streams forth from the eternal and sets the wheel to work looms up in the vision of man in various aspects and infinite forms. Each aspect creates and marks an age. Sometimes she is love, sometimes she is knowledge, sometimes she is renunciation, sometimes she is pity. This infinite energy is Bhavani. She also is Durga. She is Kali. She is Radha, the beloved. She is Lakshmi. She is our mother and the creatress of us all. In the present age, the mother is manifested as the mother of strength. She is pure Shakti. When, therefore, you ask, who is Bhavani the mother? She herself answers you, I am the infinite energy which streams forth from the eternal in the world and the eternal in yourselves. I am the mother of the universe, the mother of the worlds, and for you who are children of the sacred land, Arya Bhumi, made of her clay and reared by her sun and winds, I am Bhavani Bharati, mother of India.
The idea to build a temple was soon dropped, but something of the kind was later attempted by Baran in Manaktola Garden. Baran also traveled among the hills in Bengal, trying to find a suitable place for a temple, but he got sick and had to abandon his search and return to Baroda. There, a strange thing happened. While fighting a violent clinging fever, Baran was instantly cured through the yogic power of a Naga sannyasin named Mohan Puri. Sri Aurobindo witnessed this cure, and it confirmed his growing conviction in the power of yoga. He also received an inner message.
At that time, while we were planning to build a temple for political sannyasins, a spirit purporting to be that of Ramakrishna came and simply said, build a temple. We thought he meant that, but later I understood it as make a temple within. This gave me the final push to yoga. I thought, if there was such a more than human power, why not get it and use it for action?
And truly, it was time for action. For millions of Indians, the partition of Bengal was an unacceptable blow to the very soul of India and its ideal of unity. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. The inert mass of the Indian people awoke at the sound of a new mantra, Bande Mataram. Towards the end of 1905, Sri Aurobindo went again to Bengal to attend a conference at Barisal. There, he witnessed the electrifying effect of the cry, Bande Mataram, then resounding throughout the towns and villages of Bengal, the reviving mantra which was creating a new India. Sri Aurobindo wrote
that Bankim wrote his great song and few listened. But in a sudden moment of awakening from long delusions, the people of Bengal looked around for the truth, and in a fated moment, somebody sang Bande Mataram. The mantra had been given, and in a single day, a whole people had been converted to the religion of patriotism. The mother had revealed herself. Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
नमामि कमलम् अमलं वतुलं सुजलं सुफलं मातरम् नमामि कमलम् अमलं वतुलं सुजलं सुफलं मातरं वन्दे
Soon after the Barisal Conference, which was declared illegal by the government and broken up by the police, Sri Aurobindo toured East Bengal along with the great orator Bipin Chandra Pal. In villages and towns, enormous meetings were held, in spite of the prohibition of the district magistrate. Referring to the uprising of that time, Sri Aurobindo said,
Take the Bengal movement. The whole country was awakened within a short time. People who were such cowards and trembled at the sight of a revolver were in a short period so much changed that the police officials used to say, "That insolent Barisal look." It was the soul of the race that awoke, throwing up very fine personalities. The leaders of the movement were either yogis or disciples of yogis. Men like Manoranjan Guha Thakurta, the disciple of Bejoy Goswami. Then there were others like Brahma Bandhav Upadhyay. The influence of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda worked from behind.
Two months before the Barisal Conference, Sri Aurobindo had agreed, at Baron's suggestion, to start a revolutionary newspaper, Yugantar. The paper preached open revolt against the British and the absolute boycott of their goods. It even carried a series of articles containing instructions for guerrilla warfare. Immediately, Yugantar gained an unequaled popularity. Even petty shopkeepers and tea stall owners read the paper and were fired with patriotism. In June, Sri Aurobindo returned to Baroda. But his days as a teacher were over. His real work was now in Bengal. Invited to take charge of the newly founded Bengal National College in Calcutta, he took a one-year leave of absence and left Baroda in July 1906. The day of his departure came at last, and it was extremely touching, recalled one of his students. In the evening, Arvind Babu, though he had a very busy time, called me in his room and I sat by his side. With a caressing touch of his hand on my shoulder, he affectionately said to me,
"Well, Rajaram, we part after all. We part in body, but not in soul, which is omnipresent. I leave Baroda because supreme duty demands my presence elsewhere, and I cannot shirk."
The chapter of intensive secret revolutionary preparation was now closing, and a new chapter of public political action opened in the mosaic of India's destiny.
আমার কি হবে, কি হবে, ভবরানে ভবে আনি যে যে ভবে ডোবানি যাবায়।
In the spring of 1906, Sri Aurobindo toured Bengal with Bipin Chandra Pal, who had just founded the daily newspaper, Bande Mataram. Bipin asked Sri Aurobindo to become assistant editor, and he accepted at once. From its inception, the newspaper attacked without fear and without disguise the coercive system of government and advocated radical change. Its blistering attack on the bureaucracy left the British officials gasping for breath. Sri Aurobindo's preoccupation was to openly declare complete and absolute independence as the aim of political action in India, and he insisted on this persistently in the pages of the Bande Mataram. He was the first politician in India who had the courage to do this in public, and he was immediately successful. The party took up the word Swaraj, self-rule, to express its ideal of total independence, and it soon spread everywhere. In one of the first issues of the newspaper, Sri Aurobindo declared,
The true policy of the Congress movement should have been, from the beginning, to gather together under its flag all the elements of strength that exist in this huge country. The Brahman Pandit and the Muslim Maulavi, the laborer and the artisan, the coolie at his work and the peasant in his field, none of these should have been left out of the sphere of our activities. For each is a strength, a unit of force, and in politics the victory is to the side which can marshal the largest and the most closely serried number of such units and handle them most skillfully, not to those who can bring forward the best arguments or talk the most eloquently.
রানে ভবে আনি যে যে ভবে ডোবানি যাবায়।
already Sri Aurobindo was calling for unity, and in a short time, Bande Mataram became the spearhead of a new political party in Bengal. The Nationalist Party was at once successful, and its newspaper began to circulate throughout India.
না যা জানি ভজন
Bande Mataram came into being at a great and critical hour for the nation. It was almost unique in journalistic history, in the influence it exercised, in converting the mind of a people and preparing it for revolution. The articles were so cleverly written that they violated the spirit of the law while remaining strictly within its limits. But Bande Mataram did not confine itself to politics and the stirring questions of the day. It also spoke of Indian history and culture in order to awaken the people to India's glorious past. Education was then considered a central key to India's emancipation. And just a few days after Bande Mataram began, the Bengal National College in Calcutta opened with Sri Aurobindo as its principal. In December of that year, a session of the Indian National Congress was organized in Calcutta under the presidentship of Dadabhai Naoroji. During this session, a resolution laying down Swaraj as the goal of the Congress was passed for the first time. About the same time, the Anglo-Indian bureaucrats issued a spate of ordinances and savagely tightened the sedition laws. John Morley, the Secretary of State for India, though a high-ranking official himself, was alarmed at the severe penalties for seditious writings. These sentences are monstrous and outrageous and can never be supported, he wrote to Lord Minto. I must confess to you that I am watching with the deepest concern and dismay the thundering sentences that are being passed for sedition. We must keep order, but excess of severity is not the path to order. On the contrary, it is the path to the bomb. A few months after the Congress session in Calcutta, the nationalist leader, Lala Lajpat Rai, the Lion of the Punjab, was arrested. Sri Aurobindo was roused from his sleep and given the news. At once he penned these words:
The hour for speeches and fine writings is past. The bureaucracy has thrown down the gauntlet. We take it up. Men of the Punjab, race of the lions, show these men who would stamp you into the dust, that for one Lajpat they have taken away, 100 Lajpat will arise in his place. Let them hear 100 times louder your war cry, Jai Hindustan.
On the 24th of July, 1907, Bhupendranath Dutt, Swami Vivekananda's brother, was imprisoned for writing seditious material that appeared in Yugantar. A week later, there was a search of the Bande Mataram office, and on the 16th of August, Sri Aurobindo was arrested for sedition. The news of Babu Aurobindo Ghosh's arrest spread throughout India like wildfire. Relatively unknown outside Bengal, this young man became famous overnight, and his name became a household word all over India. The next morning, Sri Aurobindo was released on bail. Rabindranath Tagore went to see Sri Aurobindo at number 12 Wellington Street. He said, ironically, as he embraced him, "What? You have deceived us! You did not go to jail!" Sri Aurobindo replied with a smile.
Not for long will you have to wait.
It was while the sedition case was going on that Tagore published his poem, Homage to Aurobindo. Rabindranath, O Aurobindo, bows to thee. O friend, my country's friend, O voice incarnate, free of India's soul. Amid this song triumphant, vast, that encircles me, Rabindranath, O Aurobindo, bows to thee. The case opened on the 26th of August. 10 days later, Sri Aurobindo was acquitted. But the assessment of the Intelligence Bureau was categorical. Aurobindo Ghosh was the chief of the Yugantar band. He has exercised a greater influence over the revolutionary movement in India than perhaps any other man. After the Bande Mataram sedition case, Sri Aurobindo became the recognized leader of nationalism in Bengal. In December 1907, he led the party at the session of the district conference at Midnapore. And 1 week later, at a meeting in Calcutta, he delivered his first public speech. Then, Sri Aurobindo and other nationalists from all over India traveled to Gujarat for the Indian National Congress session at Surat. There, a vehement clash between the moderates and the nationalists took place, resulting in a break between the two factions. Sri Aurobindo recalled this session later on.
History very seldom records the things that were decisive but took place behind the veil. It records the show in front of the curtain. Very few people know that it was I, without consulting Tilak, who gave the order that led to the breaking of the Congress and was responsible for the refusal to join the newfangled moderate convention, which were the two decisive happenings at Surat.
This caused much amazement and discomfiture in the minds of the moderate leaders, who complained that the people had refused to listen to their old and tried leaders and clamored against them. But at the bidding of a young man new to politics, they had obeyed in disciplined silence, as if in a single body. But Aurobindo Babu was no ordinary young man, and very soon he was going to experience the first decisive turn of his inner life. After 4 years of pranayam and other practices on his own, with only a few minor results, he had a complete arrest and was at a loss. He asked Baran to arrange a meeting with someone who would help him in his sadhana. Soon, just after the Congress session was over, he left Surat for Baroda to meet the Marathi yogi Vishnu Bhaskar Lele.
Lele and I went to Sardar Majumdar's place. On the top floor, in a room, we were shut up for 3 days. Sit down, Lele told me. Look, and you will see that your thoughts come into you from outside. Before they enter, fling them back. I sat down and looked, and saw to my astonishment that it was so. I saw and felt concretely the thoughts approaching and was able to push it back concretely before it came inside. In 3 days, really in one, I got an experience which most yogis get only at the end of a long yoga. Got it without wanting or trying after it. My mind became full of an eternal silence. From then on, I began to think from above the brain and have done so ever since. As a result, the whole being became quiet, and in 7 days, I got the nirvanic experience.
But for Sri Aurobindo, as we will see, the nirvana experience was not an end in itself. He was still one of the leaders of the movement for India's independence, and when he got an invitation to address a meeting in Bombay, he was in a fix. His mind had become blank, immersed in a perfect silence. So, how was he to deliver a speech? Lele told him to make namaskar to the audience and wait, and speech would come to him from some other source than the mind. So, in fact, the speech came. And ever since, all speech, writing, thought, and impulsion to action came to him from the same source, above the brain-mind. During the next few months, he gave many speeches and wrote scores of articles in this condition of absolute inner silence, inspiring millions of Bengalis and others in India. While Sri Aurobindo engaged in public work, Baran continued his revolutionary activities. He planned to assassinate Douglas Kingsford, the merciless and sadistic presidency magistrate of Calcutta. On the 30th of April, 2 young revolutionaries from Baran's group, Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki, attempted to kill the judge by throwing a bomb into the carriage they thought he was in. But Kingsford was seated in a different carriage, and the bomb tragically killed 2 British women by mistake. Prafulla, resisting the attempt to arrest him, shot himself with his last bullet. But Khudiram Bose was arrested. After a summary trial, he was sentenced to death, a sentence he accepted quietly with a smile. Inspired by the speeches of Sri Aurobindo and Sister Nivedita, Khudiram had joined the revolutionary movement when he was just 15. He was 18 when he was hanged, becoming one of the first freedom fighters in Bengal to be executed by the British. Two days after the bombing, while Sri Aurobindo was still sleeping, the police charged up the stairs of his residence, revolvers in hand, and arrested him. Simultaneously, many members of the secret society were arrested. Among them, Baran and Ulaskar Dutt, who were found at the Maniktola garden. All of them were taken to the Lal Bazaar police station and, 3 days later, to the Presidency jail in Alipore. Here are some glimpses of Sri Aurobindo's life in prison, as told by himself.
When I was arrested, I did not know that that day would mean the end of a chapter of my life, and that there stretched before me a year's imprisonment, during which period all my human relations would cease, that for a whole year I would have to live beyond the pale of society like an animal in a cage. And when I would re-enter the world of activity, it would not be the old familiar Aurobindo Ghosh. Rather, it would be a new being, a new character, intellect, life, mind, embarking upon a new course of action that would come out of the ashram at Alipur. I have spoken of a year's imprisonment. It would have been more appropriate to speak of a year's living in a forest, in an ashram, hermitage. My solitary cell was 9 feet long and 5 or 6 feet in width. It had no windows. In front stood strong iron bars. This cage was my appointed abode. Outside was a small courtyard with stony grounds, a high brick wall with a small wooden door. A dish and a cup were all the utensils that were allowed to each of us. This cup was like a member of the Indian Civil Service, intended to serve any and every purpose. It was meant for use in the water closet, in the bath, and at meals, on which last occasion it was to serve a dual function, being used for holding our dal or vegetable curry and also as a drinking cup. It is only in an English jail that one can find a thing like this cup, and it is invaluable as a means of making a man give up all ideas of cleanliness and purity. The causes of hardship were no doubt there, but since my faith in divine mercy was strong, I had to suffer only for the first few days. Thereafter, the mind had transcended these sufferings and grown incapable of feeling any hardship. That is why, when I recollect my prison life, instead of anger or sorrow, I feel like laughing. After the jailer had seen to the blankets and the plates and bowl and left, I began to watch, sitting on the blanket, the scene before me. This solitary confinement seemed to me much better than the lockup at Lal Bazar. Here, the walls of the room seemed to come closer, eager to embrace one like the all-pervading Brahman. Here, since the door to the courtyard remained open, by sitting near the bars, one could see the open spaces and the movement of the prisoners. Alongside the courtyard wall stood a tree, its green foliage a sight for sore eyes. The prisoners in the neighboring cowshed would take out in front of the room the cows for grazing. Both cow and cowherd were daily and delightful sights. The solitary confinement at Alipur was a unique lesson in love. Before coming here, even in society, my affections were confined to a rather narrow circle, and the closed emotions would rarely include birds and animals. At Alipur, I could feel how deep could be the love of man for all created things. Men, cows, ants, birds are moving, flying, singing, speaking, yet all is nature's game. Behind all this is a great, pure, detached spirit, wrapped in a serene delight. Before imprisonment, I was in the habit of sitting down for meditation for an hour in the morning and evening. In this solitary prison, not having anything else to do, I tried to meditate for a longer period. My sadhana, before and afterwards, was not founded upon books, but upon personal experiences that crowded on me from within. But in the jail, I had the Gita and the Upanishads with me, practiced the yoga of the Gita, and meditated with the help of the Upanishads. These were the only books from which I found guidance. In my solitary cell, I was also hearing constantly the voice of Vivekananda speaking to me and felt his presence. He visited me for 15 days and spoke only on a special and limited but very important field of spiritual experience until I could grasp the whole thing. He went on teaching and impressed upon my mind the working of the higher consciousness. It is he who first gave me a clue in the direction of the supermind. This clue led me to see how the truth consciousness works in everything. Soon, the prison ceased to appear to be a prison at all. The high wall, those iron bars, the white wall, the green-leaved tree shining in sunlight, it seemed as if these commonplace objects were not unconscious at all, but that they were vibrating with a universal consciousness. They loved me and wished to embrace me, or so I felt. Once in a while, it seemed as if God Himself was standing under the tree to play upon His flute of delight, and with its sheer charm to draw my very soul out. Always, it seemed as if someone was embracing me, holding me on one's lap. The manifestation of these emotions overpowered my whole body and mind. A pure and white peace reigned everywhere, but it is impossible to describe that. The hard cover of my life opened up, and a spring of love for all creatures gushed from within.
On the 19th of October, 1908, the hearing for the trial began in the Sessions Court. The presiding judge was Charles Porton Beechcroft, who had been a scholar at Cambridge at the same time as Sri Aurobindo. The main charges were waging war against His Majesty the King, Emperor of India, and conspiracy to deprive His Majesty of the sovereignty of British India.
In the Sessions Court, the accused were confined in a large prisoner's cage, and here, during the whole day, I remained absorbed in my meditation, attending little to the trial and hardly listening to the evidence. Chittaranjan Das, one of my nationalist collaborators, and a famous lawyer, had put aside his large practice and devoted himself for months to my defense. I left the case entirely to him and troubled no more about it, for I had been assured from within and knew that I would be acquitted. But now, let me speak about the companions of my days of trouble, the boys who had been accused along with me. Watching their behavior in the courtroom, I could well guess that a new age had dawned. A new type of children had begun to live on the mother's lap. Looking at these lads, one felt as if the liberal, daring, puissant men of an earlier age with a different training had come back to India. That fearless and innocent look in their eyes, their words breathing power, their carefree, delighted laughter, even in the midst of great danger, the undaunted courage, cheerfulness of mind, absence of despair or grief, all this was a symptom not of the inert Indians of those days, but of a new age, a new race, and a new activity. If these were murderers, then one would say that the bloody shadow of killing had not fallen across their nature, in which there was nothing at all of cruelty, recklessness, or bestiality.
হাসি মুখে বিদায় দে মা ফিরে ডাকিস না।
The trial continued for about 6 months. In all, 208 witnesses were examined and cross-examined at length, and more than 1,500 articles were presented as evidence, including bombs, revolvers, and acids. During this time, Sri Aurobindo spent most of his time in deep meditation, despite the noise, agitation, and discomfort of the court. According to prosecution counsel Eardley Norton, he was treated with the reverence of a king. As a matter of fact, he was regarded as the leader not merely of Bengal, but of the whole country. When the time came for his lawyer, Chittaranjan Das, to conclude his argument, he said in a prophetic voice, "My appeal to you is this, that long after this controversy is hushed in silence, long after this turmoil, this agitation ceases, long after he is dead and gone, he will be looked upon as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. Long after he is dead and gone, his words will be echoed and re-echoed, not only in India, but across distant seas and lands. Therefore, I say that the man in his position is not only standing before the bar of this court, but before the bar of the High Court of History." On the 6th of May, 1909, Judge Beechcroft delivered his judgment. Sri Aurobindo and more than half of the others were acquitted. Baran and Ulaskar Dutt were sentenced to death by hanging. but were given 1 week to appeal. A few months later, the appellate court delivered its judgment, commuting their death sentences to transportation for life to the cellular jail on the Andaman Islands. When he came out of jail, Sri Aurobindo found the whole political aspect of the country altered. Most of the nationalist leaders were in jail or in self-imposed exile, and there was a general mood of discouragement and depression. Determined to continue the struggle, he held weekly meetings in Calcutta and gave speeches all over Bengal. 3 weeks after his release, he spoke publicly at Uttarpara of his yoga and his spiritual experiences in the Alipore jail. There were about 600 people in the audience, but he was heard in the pin-drop silence.
When I was arrested and hurried to the Lal Bazar lockup, I was shaken in faith for a while, for I could not look into the heart of God's intention. Then it seemed to me that He spoke to me and said, I have brought you here to teach you what you could not learn for yourself and to train you for my work. Then He placed the Gita in my hands. His strength entered into me and I was able to do the sadhana of the Gita. I was not only to understand intellectually, but to realize what Sri Krishna demanded of Arjuna and what he demands of those who aspire to do his work. To be free from repulsion and desire, to do work for him without the demand for fruit, to renounce self-will and become a passive and faithful instrument in his hands, to have an equal heart for high and low, friend and opponent, success and failure, yet not to do his work negligently. I realized what the Hindu religion meant. We speak often of the Hindu religion, of the Sanatan Dharma, but few of us really know what that religion is. Other religions are preponderatingly religions of faith and profession. But the Sanatana Dharma is life itself. It is a thing that has not so much to be believed as lived.
The reception Sri Aurobindo got at Uttarpara was extraordinary. But when the editor of the Hitavadi read Sri Aurobindo's speech, he told Amar Chatterjee that it was wrong for Sri Aurobindo to speak about his spiritual experiences. Laughing, Amar replied, "My Guru creates Shastra. He does not follow it." About a month after his release from jail, Sri Aurobindo began a new English weekly, Karma Yogin, a weekly review of national religion, literature, science, and philosophy. In the first issue of the review, Sri Aurobindo wrote,
"When spirituality is lost, all is lost. This is the fate from which we have narrowly escaped by the resurgence of the soul of India in nationalism. But that resurgence is not yet complete. There is a sentiment of Indianism. There is not yet the knowledge. There is a vague idea. There is no definite conception or deep insight. We have yet to know ourselves, what we were, are, and may be, what we did in the past, and what we are capable of doing in the future, our history and our mission. This is the first and most important work which the Karma Yogin sets for itself to popularize this knowledge. The Vedanta or Sufism, the temple or the mosque, Nanak and Kabir and Ramdas, Chaitanya or Guru Govind, Brahmin and Kayastha and Namashudra, whatever national assets we have, indigenous or acclimatized, it will seek to make known, to put in its right place and appreciate.
For about a year, Sri Aurobindo ran this weekly journal almost single-handedly, as well as a second weekly in Bengali, Dharma, in which he wrote in detail about his experiences in jail. At the same time, as the foremost nationalist leader in Bengal, he toured the province and gave more than a dozen speeches. But repression of the freedom movement was in full swing. The government was determined to imprison or deport Sri Aurobindo. And in the third week of July, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, Edward Norman Baker, approved a proposal to deport him. This news came to the knowledge of Sister Nivedita, and she informed Sri Aurobindo. But he countered the move by publishing in the Karma Yogin a signed article in which he spoke of the plan to deport him. He hoped that his open letter would kill the idea of deportation, and in fact, it did. But determined to get rid of Sri Aurobindo, the government decided a few months later to arrest him for sedition. As Sri Aurobindo later recounted,
I was in the Karma Yogin office when I received the word on information given by a high-placed police official that the office would be searched the next day and myself arrested. While I was listening to animated comments from those around on the approaching event, I suddenly received a command from above in a voice well known to me, in 3 words: go to Chandarnagar. In 10 minutes or so, I was in the boat for Chandarnagar, and a few hours later, we reached our destination while it was still dark.
at Chandarnagar, a local revolutionary, Motilal Roy, made arrangements for Sri Aurobindo's stay. Several times, the hiding place had to be changed, for he might have been discovered if he had stayed too long in one place. Everything was done in a cloak and dagger manner, so that nobody, except Motilal and a few friends, knew where Sri Aurobindo was. Confidentially, he informed Sister Nivedita the day after his departure and asked her to continue the Karma Yogin in his place. She consented to do this. He also sent her an amusing letter to be published in the newspaper. We are greatly astonished to learn from the local press that Sri Jut Aurobindo Ghosh has disappeared from Calcutta and is now interviewing the Mahatmas in Tibet. We are ourselves unaware of this mysterious disappearance. As a matter of fact, Sri Aurobindo is in our midst, and if he is doing any astral business with Kutumi or any of the other great rishis, the fact is unknown to his other koshas. Only as he requires perfect solitude and freedom from disturbance for his sadhana for some time, his address is being kept a strict secret. Indeed, for the next few weeks, Sri Aurobindo remained entirely engaged in sadhana. He plunged into solitary meditation and ceased all other activity. But a few weeks after his arrival at Chandernagore, while some of his friends were thinking of sending him to France, and he was wondering what to do next, he heard the same familiar voice from above give him a clear command: go to Pondicherry. On the 31st of March 1910, Sri Aurobindo left Chandernagore for Calcutta, and the next morning boarded the steamer ship Duplex, which took him to Pondicherry, the largest French colony in India. His departure from Calcutta marked the end of his active involvement in politics and the beginning of a new chapter of his life, a new adventure into the future of the earth. Some people thought that Sri Aurobindo left politics because he felt that he could do nothing or that he was afraid. Here is his own explanation.
I did not leave politics because I felt I could do nothing more there. Such an idea was very far from me. I came away because I did not want anything to interfere with my yoga, and because I got a very distinct command in the matter.
Just a few days before he left Calcutta, Sri Aurobindo wrote his last article for the Karma Yogan.
In all the events of the last year and a half, the voice of the Divine Teacher can be heard crying to us, "Abandon that you may possess, do my will, and know yourselves, purify yourselves, cease to follow your fancies. He that has ears, let him hear. Knowledge will not come without self-communion, without light from within, not even the knowledge of the practical steps that can lead to success. Every step that is taken in the light of a lower wisdom will fail until the truth is driven home. The work that was begun at Dakshineshwar is far from finished. It is not even understood. That which Vivekananda received and strove to develop has not yet materialized. The truth of the future that Bijoy Goswami hid within himself has not yet been revealed utterly to his disciples. A less discreet revelation prepares, a more concrete force manifests, but where it comes, when it comes, none knoweth.
On the 4th of April 1910, late afternoon, Sri Aurobindo arrived in Pondicherry. This was his final destination, for he remained there for the rest of his life. There, a new chapter of his journey was about to begin. A new exploration into the future of mankind was about to take place. An adventure into the unknown and the unexpected discovery of a new world and a luminous future for man and the earth. With wind and the weather beating round me, up to the hill and the moorland I go. Who will come with me? Who will climb with me? Wade through the brook and tramp through the snow. Not in the petty circle of cities, cramped by your doors and your walls I dwell. Over me God is blue in the welkin, against me the wind and the storm rebel. I sport with solitude here in my regions of misadventure, have made me a friend who would live largely, who would live freely, here to the wind-swept uplands ascend. I am the Lord of tempest and mountain, I am the spirit of freedom and pride. Stark must he be, and a kinsman to danger, who shares my kingdom and walks at my side.